Pro Wrestling Wire Radio at prowrestlingwire.com. This is Rick Del Santo joining me today, author of Wrestle, Black Bart, the new Black Bart biography. Of course, he also wrote the Lance Von Erich biography just a few years ago, which this is how me and this gentleman met, Vinny Berry, and we've become very good friends since then. Also, WrestleVille.com's Vinny Berry. I highly recommend anybody go out there and get both of these books because you're going to have a really good deep dive into these stories. But Vinny, we're here to talk about the Black Bart book, which I'm thoroughly enjoying at this point. Welcome, Vinny. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. So, tell me a little bit about this book, how this book happened, because obviously you're talking to an absolute, in my opinion, legend of the world of professional wrestling. Now, I'm looking through his credentials. I took a little bit of notes here. This guy's literally been everywhere throughout the territory system.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's what made this book a little challenging because of how vast his career was. And of course he uh, went back to, like the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, that seemed to be like a big part of his career. So yeah, it was, I was promoting my short story books, and can't remember if it was the second or third. It might have been this the volume one that I was promoting, because I don't know if I ever told you, but I wrote these both books basically around the same time. It was going to
Right.
be one book, but you know that thing would have been huge. So I split it up into two volumes, and I reached out to a gentleman that interviewed me for the Lance book, and I was just, just kind of shopping around and saying, "Hey, man, I'm looking to promote my book, and you helped me last time. Could you, And he said, "Hey, I'm not really doing the podcast right now." He said, "I'm booking wrestlers for conventions and signings and all this stuff." And then he said to me, he goes, "Hey, man, I've been working with Black Bart, and he's been looking for a writer. Is this something that you'd be interested in doing?" And I said, "Yeah, I would be interested in doing. However, I'm just so bogged down right now, man. I mean, I was working on those two short story books, and um, it was a little more challenging than I thought, the formatting and putting them together. Matter of fact, these were the first books that I basically, you know, did all the pictures and everything, and they have a ton of pictures, and so it took me time. And so when I got caught up, I called that gentleman back and said, "Hey, um, you think Bart is still looking for somebody?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know. I can find out." I said, "All right, well, you know, uh, see if it's okay if I get his number, or you can give him my number or whatever." Anyway, he ended up sending me his number, and I called Bart, and the first thing I just said, "Hello, this is Vinny," who is like, "Vinny, I've been waiting for you to call me, dadgummit." And that was it. He was like, "Write my book and write my book." And we were talking, and he was telling me some stories, and he goes, "We're gonna do this, right?" And I said, "Well," I said, "Hey man, why don't we just talk for a week or two?" I said, "You might not like me in a week or two, Why don't we just kind of get a feel for each other and see how this is gonna go?" And basically, I was taking notes, and you know, before I even really kind of agreed to do it, And one day I was walking with my wife. She goes, "You're gonna write that book, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna write that book."
So tell me, did you meet up with Bart a lot to do these interviews, or did you handle this stuff like via Zoom or over the phone,
We
or what?
we we did everything over the phone, like
Yeah.
in record on Google
Okay.
Voice.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Bart. He had like an amazing career. I think he did, at least.
Yeah,
Now,
he did have a good career. I mean, he almost 30 years.
yeah. Well, according to my notes, he had started, let's see here, 1975 and retired 2006. And I'm saying, 2006, he probably just, did a couple one-offs here and there. You know what I
Right,
mean? But
right.
as many older wrestlers do now, I just want to say that my first exposure to him, I believe, was in World Class. I think, if memory serves me correct, and he was a former world class heavyweight champion when they decided to introduce the world championship when they after they separated from the NWA at one point.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely
Yeah,
right. And that story's in the book, how that all came about. He wasn't even planning to stay in world class. Here's the interesting thing for so he's from the Dallas Fort Worth area.
right.
And so he knew Fritz and he trained in Dallas with a guy named Ivan the Terrible and he was acquainted with Fritz and he wanted to work for Fritz. And Fritz
Yeah,
says, well, that's not how it works. You need to go out and make a name and then come back. But he liked Bart and he always said, hey, go make a name for yourself and I'll have a spot for you. Well, when he did that, he went off and he worked 7 years in the Carolinas, the Mid Atlantic Territory, and then he ended up working in Mid South. But every time that he would, you know, uh, come back home to the Dallas Fort Worth area, he'd say, "Hey Fritz, I'm in town," and Fritz would give him some matches, and he'd work like on the undercard, and so he was building this rapport, with Fritz, and Fritz was kind of getting to see, well, he was being able to see his progress and how he was growing as a wrestler. And so, that was, that was
yeah.
how all that started.
So I have here that when he won or awarded the world class championship, it was because Chris Adams was the champion. He left the organization abruptly, and they just awarded him the title. Is this correct? Yep.
Yeah, they dropped the title on his duffel bag and said, "You're the new champ." Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I mean, I always found it weird that he was the champion there, in a way, even though I did quite enjoy his work, but it just seemed a little oddball to me.
he beat Chris Adams in El Paso.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Uh, quotes and air quotes. Yes, yes. From there, of course, he went to the UWF, which was, of course, formerly World South. He spent about a year there, and before it being absorbed by Jim Crockett Promotions as well.
Right, right. And there's a really, really good story in there, there's a really good story of UWF and him and the boys, and I'm just gonna tease it, but but it was basically his introduction to the Steiners.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I know this story, I believe, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think I read about this. It's quite enjoyable, but you guys are all going to have to see and go out and get this book. You can go to wrestleville.com and buy it. I'm going to show this book while we're here this entire time. So,
okay, yeah,
so
I
you
will
know,
too.
I got my copy this week. I'm really excited to be owning this book. So,
It really is a fun read, Rick. I've of course I read it a lot when I'm writing it. I read it and I read it and I'll read it over until I get that flow, right? But
right,
you know, I sat down this weekend with the book in hand, right? This is the first
right.
time I opened the book and read it, right? I've read it on the computer and all that stuff, but it's it was an enjoyable read, and I read it from the perspective of not knowing the story. And I thought, it's fun, it's funny, it's interesting, it's wow, it's got a lot of great stories in it. And I think I think you're gonna get a chuckle or two when you're reading it.
Yeah. And he was a friendly guy. I spoke to him a number of years ago. So he was very friendly, at least from an online presence, when I introduced
Oh,
myself and spoke with him. So,
he
you know,
is a genuine dude through and through,
yeah.
through and
Uh,
through.
so let's get, and so I don't want you to reveal too many stories within the book because I want people to go out and buy the book. But there's something I'm dying to know, and it's obviously there was this legendary, iconic character that came from the World Wrestling Federation, and I want everybody to go and buy this book, right? So we're not going to go too deep into these stories, but I want to know how true it was that Bart was in the running to become that character before it was decided that he wouldn't be, excuse me, last second in one called The Undertaker.
Yeah, and someone asked me online, is you know, and it was like a sarcastic remark, like,
Mm-hmm.
is he going to say that, Vince had him in mind for this character?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, it wasn't Vince. It was Dusty Rhodes.
Right.
you know, um, Dusty Rhodes, as you know, a lot of Dusty Rhodes stories in here, and as
Mm-hmm.
we all know who follow wrestling, especially from that era. Yeah,
Yeah.
was it genius, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
he was the pioneer of pay-per-views and uh simulcasting and all these gimmicks and all these gimmick matches, and just I mean, just magic, right? And
Yeah.
so any these guys, so many people wanted to work with uh with Dusty. There's a story in this book as well about leaving Florida, and when they left Florida, 16 wrestlers left with Dusty.
That's when the territory just went down the tubes, basically, at that time.
Absolutely.
And
And
it
and I talked to Kevin Sullivan. He says, well, yeah, that territory basically died because you can't
Yeah.
have that many guys leave at one time, you know?
And then Dusty tried to revive it shortly after with too much failure, if you for lack of a better term, not to insult the guy, but it just never took off the way that he wanted it to when he tried to revive it. If you remember, probably early 90s. If you
Yeah, you know what? That was kind of an era that I was kind of doing other things in life. So I do have black holes in my wrestling history.
We all do. Yeah. 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 So tell me more about that. There is some truth to that Undertaker story, correct?
Well, I mean, according to Bart, yes.
Yeah.
And I don't believe he's making it up. I've heard this story before. I did try to track down Dustin Rhodes and to confirm, uh, because in the book, uh, Dustin comes to Black Bart hotel and says, "Hey, my dad wants to talk to you." He goes, "Okay, I'll go up and see him." And he goes up and sees him, and he reveals this idea, and um, you know, I don't believe it is far fetched. And if you read the book and read that chapter in the following chapter, I really think that when you read the book, you'll be like, wow,
Mhm.
unbelievable. Because, you know, Bart had an opportunity to go to the WWF,
Mhm.
didn't take it. And because he didn't take it, that's probably why when he did take it, he got
Okay.
the
You
role
got
that he
the
got.
right. Well, I'm looking at his WWF career. It's mostly squash matches and him being
Yeah.
a job guy and him just getting wins over other preliminary wrestlers. So it seemed like he might have gotten a tiny push when he made his debut, for the first couple weeks before they decided to just, when they put him on TV, he just, like you said, got that role. Like he just was putting other guys over. And I think that he got decimated by LOD when they came in as well, just annihilated. So, and this is a guy that's a former champion, a former name elsewhere, was not treated as such.
Well, I do know that Dusty liked him and liked
Mhm.
Ron Bass because those guys were loyal and they were
Right.
hard working dudes. And let me tell you something, tough, 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 right?
Yeah.
And they were good employees.
Yep.
So I don't see him not being a good employee in the WWF. Um, I just think that, and I think when you read the book, you'll be like, oh, okay, well then that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. From there, he went to WCW for a short
Yes,
stint,
he did.
actually, in 1991. I believe he was teamed up with, oh, geez, I know it. The Desperados, Dutch Mantel and Deadeye Dick, who was, geez, I'm trying
Randy
to,
Colley.
Randy Colley, yes, from the Moondogs, yes. So,
Yeah.
and
And
they came in doing a bunch of comedy gimmicks, like a comedy
that's
cowboy
right.
type gimmicks, which to me, I saw this. I said, what the hell is this? I liked all three of these guys, and it was just kind of, but if anybody's going to pull it off, it could be the three of those guys in a comedic role.
Well, here's the deal on that, and that's in the book as well. Dusty saw chemistry in these gentlemen and
Mm-hmm.
thought that he could do something with them outside of wrestling.
Right.
And so they shot a pilot for this comedy show, it was basically loosely based on the Three Stooges, right? But cowboys.
Right. Okay.
And I'm not, I'm not, I'm not gonna give the punchline here, but
Yeah.
somebody basically spoiled that opportunity for them. Um, I think Bart was the one who could have benefited the most out of that, and the other guys were like, no big deal, but it bothered Bart. And so that story's in the book, and you'll find out what went down and why it didn't happen. And yeah, it was one of those missed opportunities that because somebody got their feelings hurt, it didn't happen for Bart.
Right. Right. What else? What else went after this? Now, I think he went to Global. Did he not go to Global? I believe he did.
He
Correct.
did go to Global, which
Right.
is,
Okay. Which
yeah,
was short
and
stint. They only
in
lasted a
Dallas,
couple of
right?
years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, basically the new world class, right? Because a lot of guys from world class were
It was
there.
everybody from World Class USWA at the time. Yeah,
Yeah,
guys at Texas Legends, I guess you could say.
right, right.
Yeah. So yeah, he spent some time there, but I don't think he was. At that time the Dallas area was struggling. I had Craig Johnson on here on the podcast a while back. We spoke about there'd be as few as 75 people in that arena, as and that was one of the hottest buildings probably just a few years prior. You know what I mean, with World Class.
Well,
And
yes, but they did have, and I confirmed this with JBL and James Beard, and of
mhm,
course Bart. Um, they had a short window in '93. Now, after so when Bart was up in WWF, Terry
mhm,
Von Erich was up in WWF.
correct. Yep.
And they might have even wrestled each other up there. I don't know. I I didn't look through the records, but however, anyway, they were up there and they kind of crossed paths, so to speak. Uh, when Bart ended up back in Dallas at the Global Wrestling Federation, Kerry ended up coming back to Dallas when he left WWF.
Right.
And a lot of people, I don't know if a lot of people know it, but Kerry's last angle was with Black Bart.
Okay. Yep.
And they did a different style of marketing this time. Instead of like a slow build on the angle in like, matches and maybe interference at the interview table, or um
Gotcha.
they basically started in gimmick matches, right? In cage matches. They what James Beard was, he called it hot shotting. They were
Yes.
hot shotting this territory because what they were trying to do is they were trying to get it to explode again, right? And so they had Black Bart and they had Kerry, and for about weeks, they just would attack each other. They'd have pull aparts, but they didn't just do it on TV. They're baiting the crowd, right? They know that something's going to happen between Kerry and Bart, but they're just basically baiting the crowd, baiting the crowd. They're having all these pull aparts, but they're not just doing it on TV. They're doing it in the middle of the week, on the Tuesday and the Wednesday and Thursday at these little gymnasiums. So these
Right.
people who are going to these live shows where there's no television are seeing, and then they're watching on TV and they know something's going to happen. Well, they were they were given free tickets, but they were charging for parking and concessions. So they were starting to fill the building.
Right.
And dude, the bills were getting paid,
Right. Okay.
and so it was working, but you know, because of an unexpected tragedy,
Right.
all that went away.
Right. Yeah. I think the timing was they really bad at that point. So that was, I think, Kerry's last angle, last work.
Absolutely.
So you have forwards basically here by JBL, WWE legend, James Beard, who contributions from James Beard, who actually he was in the Iron Claw movie. I interviewed him just weeks before the movie came out. Incredibly nice gentleman. You have words
Oh
from
yeah.
Sam Houston here as well. Another wrestling legend. You got all these names, and then if you read the back of the book here, you got all these guys commenting here. Denny Brown, another guy I interviewed a while back. You got Andrew Anderson, Kevin Sullivan, the grappler Len Denton, and Wild Bill Irwin. All these legends are taking part in this book, putting over Black Bart, telling you what they think about him, on top of getting able to read this amazing story of this man. So, this professional wrestling legend. So, you went all out with this book, Vinny.
Well, you know what? I enjoyed this project. I It was a quite the undertaking. But yes, Bill Irwin and Denny Brown and all those guys and Lynn Denton and Sam Houston, and even, I didn't spend a lot of time talking to Kevin Sullivan. I talked to him a couple times briefly,
Yep.
but boy, he was very, very helpful. And I think fans are really, again, just kind of like it with the Lance book. I said, I, I think people are expecting something else, but I think they're going to take away something else.
Yeah.
That was what I believed with the Lance book, and a lot of people told me that. I think this is too. I would, I told Bart when we were working on this, I said, "Look, dude, you're all over the internet. And you've done
Yeah.
shoot interview." And I said, seriously, dude, what are we going to put out there that you haven't put out there?
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff on here that in the book that I'm sure he's talked about, right? The
Yeah.
Undertaker. But I think there's a lot of stuff in here that isn't, and I think people are going to really see the just the connections that he had with different wrestlers and different promotions, and you know right before Mike Von Erich died, they were in Japan,
Mhm.
so Mike Von Erich died in April,
Right.
and they went to Japan in January. Buzz Sawyer, Mike Von Erich, Bart, and the stories in there of their time in Japan, and Buzz is talking to Bart and tells him, he says, "Hey, Fritz told me to keep an eye on Mike, to take care of his boy." And he goes, "Really?" And he did. And the story's in there, and there's an incident that happens in the dressing room that kind of was a wake-up call for Buzz and Bart. And
Hmm.
you know um sadly, you know uh Mike took his life. And so,
Yes.
you know he too, kind of like Lance was at these monumental moments
Right.
in world class championship wrestling, and so was Bart. And so I think when you know you talk about the Florida territory and everybody goes up, wow, Bart was there. You talk
Hmm.
about all the wrestlers that went with him and what happened, and of course, you know the tragic death of Eddie Graham as well is in there.
Right. Yep.
He talks about Bill Watts and what it was like working with him. It talks about the guys that worked over there, Gene Anderson. He talks about Ole Anderson, the Four Horsemen, and he talks a lot about Arn Anderson. Arn Anderson was a good friend of his. They wrestled
Right.
together in the Pensacola, Alabama area,
Right.
Southeastern Championship Wrestling. And
Yeah.
so he talks about how Arn Anderson was, even back then, was something very, very special. So I think fans are going to enjoy the story. It really is a fun read. I mean, it is. Like I said, I read it, and I am so critical of my work, man. I mean, I enjoyed the book, and I thought, okay, you know, it's funny. There's some funny stuff in this book, and I mean, it's the way he tells his stories. He talks about, there's a hilarious story in here about Kabuki, and there's a funny story in here with Lynn Denton. They get pulled over, and the police officer stop Bart for speeding. He tells Bart, he goes, "Bart, what are you doing?" And they're drinking beer in the truck, and he goes, "Well, we're trying to get home." And he goes, he says to him, he goes, "You know what, Bart? You know who my favorite wrestler is?" And he goes, "Well, I hope it's me." And he goes, "No, it's the grappler." Well, Lynn Denton is sitting in the vehicle right there. So it's little things like that I think people are going to, like I said, he's he tells a lot of story. A lot of people enjoy his storytelling. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this book, and he does get
Yep.
personal, and he
Yep.
talks about his family a little bit. He talks about what his childhood was like. He talks about how he was so passionate about football, and that ended up not working out the way that he wanted to, but he was so determined to pursue pro wrestling that nobody was going to stop him. And you know, did he have a Ric Flair career? No, not at all. But is is he what I would call a pillar in professional wrestling? Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, He had an awesome career. I'm going to tell you that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a ton of pictures also in this book as well that you get to see a young Black Bart. There's a great picture of a young Tommy Young in here, legendary referee. So and of course Ron Bass and a ton of other pictures. So I think everybody should go out and get this. It's wrestleville.com. How much is this book, Vinny?
It's running for $22.
See, there you go. $22. You can, the Valentine's Day gift. Buy your husband a Valentine's Day gift, or and I'm sure he'll like it. Buy it for your wife, and then you read it. So
Yeah,
I'm sure
there's
everybody.
yeah, there's like 50 pictures in it. There's 360 pages in it, or
It's a big
336
book.
pages. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big book. So
Yeah,
we're just talking about Len Denton, of course, the grappler as well. Have you read his book?
I have not. I have not.
Mm.
But
That's another highly recommended read if I do say so myself. You
yeah,
should
you
probably
know
run
what?
out and get that if you get
I
a
have
chance.
heard that and I've wanted to read it. You know what? And I think I will. Me and Lynn talk from time to time.
Yeah.
What a wonderful guy. What a nice guy, man.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Vinny, is there anything else that you want to throw out there about this book? I mean, I had a great time talking to you as always, every time we do this. So, you know,
Well,
is there
there's the stories, the chapters on Sam Houston
Mhm.
and Bruce Brody, I think are something special that I like. I just thought they were just fun. The chemistry that him and Sam had, the friendship that him and Frank had. He talks, there's a chapter in here about Mr. Fuji. There's a chapter in here about Dick Slater, Sergeant Slaughter. There's a lot of Roddy Piper in here, you know, uh, Ronnie Garvin. So if you're an old school wrestling guy, you're gonna be or gal, you're gonna be like, wow, this is the book for me. It's got Von Erichs in it, it's got Ron Bass in it. It's got a lot of Mid Atlantic in it, a lot of Florida in it. Um, there was an opportunity that Black Bart had. Matter of fact, his first NWA world title match was against Kerry Von Erich. And he talks about him visiting with Kerry that day and talking about, because David had just died.
Right.
And Bart had wrestled with David when he was in Georgia. And
Mhm.
they struck up a quick friendship because they're both from the same area. They both like hunting and fishing. They were cowboy dudes, right? And Bart talks about how, you know, I had so much in common with David. He was so easy to talk to, but when it came to Kevin and Kerry, it was like wrestling was what we had in common.
Yeah.
And so he talks about, this moment that he has with Carrie and talking about his brothers. And, he talks about you know, how tough Fritz was, and I think with the movie coming out, and I will say this, what I think is really cool about this book is in the Lance book ends, right? in in world class. It ends like in what, the summer of 87, right?
Yep. Yep.
Well, he comes in the summer of 86. So where the Lance book leaves off, you could read world class in the Lance book and pick it up where Bart comes in and almost read it like
Like
another
parallel
book.
storylines away. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah,
very cool because that's actually one of my favorite eras of world class as well. It's a very
it is.
underrated era in my personal opinion because like the early 80s were really like huge for them up until like probably 85, 86. And it's just like after that, it's just kind of like, I guess, mid grade according to like other people. But to me, there was some amazing talent going in and out of there. And then when they started that open door policy, I'm just telling you, it was on fire for me.
Yeah, and it was really sad, that the how that territory the way that it was. I'll give the listeners a just an understanding. It talks about it in both books. It talks about this, but if you think about it, in 1984, at the
Mhm.
Parade of Champions at Texas Stadium, 40,000 people, right? It was 110
Yeah.
degrees.
Yep.
I was there.
Were
My
you really?
Yeah,
Wow.
my dad was like, no more outdoor wrestling shows. We're not doing it, you know? Every time I asked him to go wrestling, it was like, is it indoors? I'm not doing outdoors. And it was hot, man.
Yeah.
Well, 40,000 people. Fast fast forward 3 years from 84 to 87. 80 degrees and maybe 6,000 people.
Yeah. It was a decline from that first event because
Oh yeah.
I've read the numbers in the past. Each year they got less and less people for that event in that arena.
Yes, yes, but if you think about it, what happened?
They
Well,
lost everybody.
yeah, but I mean, Kerry had his motorcycle accident,
Yep.
Mike just took his life, you know, and I mean, so, there really was this disheartening factor that played in all of that. I mean, I lived there, and so, I mean, you know, it was a sad time,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, I lived 10 miles from where they lived. So
Mhm.
it was very common uh for people to have Von Erich sightings, right? And
Yeah.
so, I didn't know these people personally. And, no one I knew them personally, but they were ours, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and when these tragedies happened, I mean, they affected us. I mean, we'd go to work and people would be sad and they weren't even wrestling fans and they'd be, man, did you hear about Mike or
Yeah,
did you hear?
they're like a local celebrity that people
Right,
knew. It's like seeing somebody on the news that you see every single day. You don't
right,
necessarily know them, but they live in town.
right.
You'll see them at the diner, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody knew who the Von Erichs were in
Right.
Texas.
Right.
Yes,
Exactly. Yeah. You have a connection to them
right,
in a way.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
yeah. So it's wrestleville.com. You can go in there. There's a store. You can buy it. You can buy the other books as well. You can buy Lance by Chance. You can buy Wrestleville Volume 1 and 2, which I also very much recommend. I have all your books, okay? So I have all four of your books. I highly
Thank you.
recommend everybody get those short story books because there's a lot of really cool stuff you can read about my good friend Mario Mancini in one of those books as well, and amongst many others, amongst
Right.
many legends, many independent talent. So I highly recommend that. And of course, I really want everybody to go pick up this book because it's a very good book. And if you are a fan, I pick up a lot of books based on guys that are older territory guys and such like that. And this, when you told me, you told me months before you ever announced that you were doing a book on this, I got terribly excited about a book on Black Bart because I was always a fan of his, and I was very happy that somebody was writing a book based on this gentleman's career and life.
Yeah, you know what? I even mentioned in the book. I write something in the back of the book, and I would have never thought that when I discovered this guy when I was 14 or 15 years old that I'd ever write about him. And um, you know what? I'm so glad that this project came my way. Bart is a wonderful guy. He's a great guy. He's not doing well health wise right now, but the guy is tougher than a $2 steak. And I talked to him today. He had a rough day,
Right.
and I was talking to him a little bit, and I was talking to his wife, and I guess she had me on speaker, and I said, "All right, well, tell Bart." I said, "Have a good night." She goes, "Well, he can hear you." And I said, "All right, Bart, have a good night." And then he said, "You too, buddy." And you know what? He's just a good, genuine dude, man.
Good. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, he's just a good guy.
Uh, So, Vinny, do you want to pump out anything else before we say goodbye tonight?
Well, just check out my interviews, my podcast. I interview people on the independent scene. I interview some legends of the business, up and comers. You can find me on iTunes, Spotify, Russellville.com, uh, Fans First Sports Network. I'm kind of all over the place, Podbean. But please check out my interviews. Listen, to some of the stories. I think you'll thoroughly enjoy them. We have nice conversations, and yeah, the wrestlers are so giving of their time, and got some really good ones coming up this month. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So, of course, I always a very big supporter of the Wrestleville, the brand, Wrestleville podcast, Wrestleville, the website,
Yes, you
and
are.
happy to be a very good friend of Vinny Berry's as well. So, I want to say thank you, Vinny. Thank you, anybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you after a while.